Psychology of Change, Employee Essentials for the New Workplace. Might just give everybody an extra minute to jump online. Can see there's lots of you who have already joined, so thank you. My name is Vicky. I work here at the Myers-Briggs company. Just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending an email with the link to the recording and slides, along with some complimentary resources and notes within the next few days. So I think we'll get into it now. It's 12 o'clock. So a little bit about the Myers-Briggs company. We've been around for over 65 years. We are a mission-driven organization, and our mission is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And we deliver on this through our talent identification and development consulting services, and also by offering certification in trusted psychometric assessments for those practitioners who want to bring the capability in-house. So at the Myers-Briggs company, we deliver on our mission by working with organizations of all sizes and from all industry sectors to design and deliver development programs relating to teams, leadership, organizational development, coaching, and selection. So our presenter today is Dr. Martin Bolt. He is the Senior Director of Professional Services and Psychologist at the Myers-Briggs company. Martin's role is pivotal in helping people respond to the ever-changing work environments. He has experience partnering with organizations in Australia and internationally, helping people to apply insights from research to areas including leadership development, executive coaching, team effectiveness, organizational change, virtual training solutions, and workplace well-being. During this webinar, Martin will highlight key insights from recent research about new and emerging expectations people have about their work and practical steps for navigating the changes we face in this new era of work. He will show how leaders and employees can take steps to navigate change, particularly those arising for the hybrid work environment. And so with that, I'll turn over to Martin.
Terrific. Thanks, Vicky, and welcome everyone to our session today. And again, we're really pleased to see that a number of people have registered and joining our session. And I guess the topic is quite relevant for what many of us are probably experiencing. And it probably goes without saying, we all have unique or have been having unique experience of changes in our workplace arising from the pandemic. So we are keen to tap into your experiences today. And so please be ready to share your thoughts to some live polls and some questions that we'll be posing to you during the session. So at a very introductory level, here's what we'll spend some time looking at today. So we'll start with what are some assumptions that are emerging about what employees need and want and what employers are expected to do, but also what are these expectations based on research. We'll look at why employers and employees will need to adapt, but in particular adapt to new issues and new changes that are arising from working for many years in a COVID environment, but also the new ways of working as we live with COVID. And also, what are some practical ways leaders, employees, and teams can navigate the change? So I do want to share with you some examples and work we've been doing with clients, and I'll share that through a case study as well. So to kick off our session, we'd like to hear about a change you are currently facing at work that might be presenting a challenge for you or you're seeing as a challenge for others. Now, to capture your experiences and thoughts on that, you can actually type your change challenge in a word or two or a sentence or two in the question box for the webinar today. So if you want to go to the question box and you've got a change to share, please do. And we'll look at some of the challenges that people have shared from our session today at the end and see how we might make sense of that or connect it back to what we're covering in our session. So if you do have a change or a change challenge that you're happy to share, please go ahead now and type that into the question box. So the last 2 years have seen a great deal of speculation, forecasting. There's been a lot of analysis about changes that are occurring in our lives and particularly the workplace. and much of that emerging from new norms that are being established, right through to ways that people discovered they could interact or undertake their work when we were faced with periods of lockdown or remote work, and now even hybrid work and what that means. So let's look at some common assumptions and, in fact, what are some new expectations that have emerged. Now, again, here is an interactive moment. So I'm going to present some quotes and statements that we have been seeing circulating in the news and business media. And I'm interested to hear which of the following you think are true, that are accurate, and which of these you think are maybe more of a myth or not substantiated yet. Now, the way you can indicate your truth or myth, to participate, all we're going to do is ask you to type T if you think the statement is true, or M if you think the statement is myth into the questions box. And as we look at each statement after you've had a chance to nominate your response, I'll ask Vicky to share what were the majority of responses coming through for each statement. So here's the first statement. You may have heard this circulating around. The Great Resignation is currently happening in Australia. So I'll just give everyone a moment to nominate T or M in the questions box. And Vicky, when we've got some responses in there, maybe if you could share with us what you're seeing in terms of majority or if it's equal.
Thanks, everybody. Everyone's very quick off the mark. I would say actually on this one, we've got a really balanced mix of truth and myth.
Okay, all right, so there's a bit of mixed views on that one. Here's another statement. Employees' expectations about the location of where they work has changed since the pandemic. So truth or myth, does that look like something that you've seen evidence for, or is it maybe more a myth, but it's going around and being circulated? So again, Vicky, when you've got some responses, yeah, let us know what's coming through.
This one is definitely a resounding truth. There's maybe a few people that think of myth, but a lot of truths for that one.
Okay, so there's consistency there. Let's go to the next one. Leaders are responding to issues that are important for attracting and retaining employees. So is it true that leaders are responding to the important issues, or is that maybe more of a myth? So let's hear what people's votes are on this one.
I think this one's maybe about like 70% myth, I reckon,
Okay.
and the rest truth. So a bit mixed.
Mixed on that one, but leaning more in the myth direction. And finally, employees are more productive if they're allowed to work entirely remotely or virtually. So truth or myth? Is there evidence that people are more productive if they're working entirely remotely or virtually, or is that more of a myth? So again, Vicky, what are you seeing there?
I think this one has to go to a resounding success to myth. There are a few truths, but definitely a bit more of a landslide towards myth.
Excellent. All right, great. So first of all, thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts. And what I wanted to do is calibrate our thinking around this with some current research. So this word cloud that I've generated represents the number of times these words or phrases have appeared in the media in the last year. And the larger the size word on screen, the more often it has been reported in articles and news stories about the workplace. And you can see there is much talk about the Great Resignation. And in a moment, we'll look at, is there any evidence for that? But there are a number of other phrases that have just become everyday: remote, hybrid. And one example said it's not so much a great resignation, but maybe more of a great shift storm. I've got to be careful how I say that. So here is the latest data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing the proportion of employees who've changed jobs in the last year. Now you can see the data tracks way back into the 70s. And if we look in on the 2022, it indicates that the Great Resignation from this data has actually not really played out or occurred in Australia the same way that it appears to be occurring in other countries. So 2022 has seen approximately 9.5% of people changing their jobs, which is only as high as what occurred back in 2012. So there's not this dramatic uptick in resignation at this point in time, and certainly not much any more different than what was going on in 2012. What we have seen in this data is people in professional roles were the highest proportion of workers who changed jobs in the last year. And some other interesting things from the ABS data is that the annual retrenchment rate is 1.5%, which is actually the lowest annual retrenchment rate on record since 1972. So businesses are not actively involved in retrenchments. The most common reason people indicated in this research of why they changed or left their job in the last year was to get a better job or just wanted a change. And that was the reason for approximately 33% of people. So this indicates that employees are mostly staying put in their current roles in Australia, but those who are changing jobs appear to be quite confident that they're going to get a better role or a higher pay or better conditions when they do change. So here's another chance to participate in another poll that we've put together for our session. So I've been trawling the latest business surveys to see what has emerged as the most important issues that employees rate as the most important issues in 2022. And we're going to ask you, as you look at these group of issues, because these are in the top list of issues, out of this set of issues, which do you think is currently the most important issue for the majority of employees? Now, we've got a poll on this one, so I'll ask Vicky if you can launch the poll, and we'll give everyone a chance just to select which one of those issues you think is the most important for employees currently in the workplace. So Vicky, let us know when the poll's up and running.
Yep, the poll is live. I'll just give everybody a little bit of time to get their answers in.
Fantastic. And again, I'm sure most of us will probably think all of those issues are important, but if you had to rate their relative importance by way of rank, which one do you think might come out on top for employees? And when we've got a chance for everyone to respond, we'll be good to hear, Vicky, what's coming through in terms of the highest ranked.
Great. I will pop the results on screen now for everybody.
Excellent. Is that coming through now by the looks of it?
Yep, so everyone should be able to see this now. So we can see here that work fits with lifestyle. So looking at family needs and commute and things like that, that's come in as the highest with 36%. We've got attractive remuneration, benefits and pay increases, second in line at 20%. Then followed by, we've got flexible work locations at 26%. And then positive relationships and employers actively supporting well-being, they're both equal at 9%.
Okay, great. So just to recheck, the number one was work fits with lifestyle. Was that the one that came out top?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so first of all, thanks again for sharing your thoughts. How does our set of responses today fit with the actual research and what's coming through there? So here's the rank order that we identified in the research. The number one most important issue and expectation for employees this year is flexibility to work in a preferred location. That can be either completely remote or their preference to work at a workplace or the preference to work hybridly, combination of at a workplace and then other days remote. The number two was that employees are expecting their businesses or their employers to actively support well-being and mental health. That came in very high, and that's really moved up the ranking of importance, particularly in the last 2 years. Number three was of importance was that they have attractive remuneration benefits and pay increases. Number four is people saying it's having positive co-worker relationships and being able to work in an organisation that supports diversity and an inclusive culture. was important, and number 5 out of the top 5 actually was work fits lifestyle. So it's interesting, we probably got almost the opposite ranking there for that one today. But when we look at the research that's come from, and we've cited some of the sources there, these are the sort of not only top 5, but where the relative importance might be. So that's what we're hearing from business surveys of what employees are expecting or wanting. But what is the actual current experience of employers and employees? What are they currently saying is their experience of working in 2022? So here we've captured some research from Sue Williamson at the University of New South Wales, which she's been conducting between 2020 and 2022. And what she actually found is that over that period of time, those people working in hybrid work arrangements, that is sometimes at work in a workplace, sometimes part of the week away from the workplace, they report working longer hours and that their productivity remained high and has remained high, they're reporting over the last 2 years. But in comparison to measures of productivity and outputs, they're actually found this year that the productivity outputs have returned back to pre-2020 levels. So whilst in 2020 and 2021 productivity seemed to go up, for many places it's moved back to that pre-2020 levels. In terms of what managers are seeing, they believe hybrid workers, fewer managers believe that their hybrid workers are as productive in 2022 compared to 2020 and 2021. So I think earlier in our poll, there was a resounding sort of yes, people working remotely could be productive, but managers are starting to form a different view. The majority of employees, and this seems to average out around 2/3, prefer to maintain working in a hybrid format. And in fact, 80% of people said they'd be willing to change employment if hybrid was no longer offered. Also, more employees are reporting fatigue and burnout in this year compared to 2020. So there's been an uptick in that. And from our own research, where we've been conducting wellbeing analysis over each year, we actually did find that people were rating their workplace wellbeing lower in 2020 and 2021 compared to 2019. And I'll touch more on some of our wellbeing research as we get further into our session. But you can see there is actually a growing gap in some of the perceptions employers have about what works and what's not working, and what employees are saying what works for them. So the need for employers and employees to continue adapting to changes that may appear with little warning. And again, a number of changes have cropped up for us that we weren't necessarily planning for in the last 2 years, or that we can refer back to at another point in our recent history of similar changes. There isn't that kind of reference point that we're dealing with. So what is becoming clearer is employers need to be aware of and respond to employee expectations proactively, particularly in Australia, as in the case in many other countries, there are actually more jobs that need to be filled than available employees. So this really has switched to an employees marketplace. There is more opportunity for employees to pick and choose where they work and how they want to work. So here are some things we've captured that employers need to not only be aware of, but will need to respond to if they want to retain and attract people in the current environment. They need to be aware that employee expectations for increased flexibility are remaining and don't look like they're going away. So there needs to be a willingness to negotiate around what flexibility means. Employers need to be aware that their staff are going to expect them to provide evidence-based health and psychological wellbeing support as part of their work experience. And again, when we say evidence-based, it's not just what is something that sounds like a good idea. Is there any evidence that it's helpful for wellbeing? Leaders also need to be aware that their employees are looking for leaders who are going to foster and build trust and inclusion with them. And this now becomes even more crucial in hybrid working arrangements where you don't have as much in-person interaction as what we had pre-pandemic. That employers are going to need to provide competitive and accurate value of their remuneration and benefits. And what can sometimes get overlooked in what employers are offering is not just the salary, but what are the wider benefits of working with an organisation that would be attractive to employees. And finally, there are more employees who are looking for increased autonomy in how they can make choices about how they do their work and where it fits with their personal work life. So if any of you are in the employer seat, here are some things to be mindful of and maybe to check where are the expectations with your staff. Now, organisations and businesses have always had to respond to change. That's not new, but what is new since the pandemic is the type of changes leaders and organisations are facing. So with the research in mind and also what we're seeing from clients that we're working with, what I'll share with you now are some key areas we are seeing that are emerging as very important, more than ever, for building commitment to changes that organisations are trying to adapt to or make. And this is looking at how do we build commitment to making changes that not only leaders lead and sponsor, but that employees and teams get behind and are willing to be part of it. So I'll include in this section a case study of an organisation that we've been working with recently around these areas, so you can see what this looks like in terms of the actual changes that need to happen. Now, what is also become very salient, is particularly in the last 18 months, is there's more growing research showing that since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, a significantly larger number of people have started to reevaluate and question their careers and, in fact, what is the purpose of their career and where does it fit within their wider lifestyle. Now, when we think about purpose, having and pursuing a purpose, whether it's at work or outside of work, offers meaning and also is a way of building resilience when we face challenges, resilience to keep moving forward. And some of you will be aware of the philosopher Nietzsche, who said, if I have a why to live, I can bear almost any how. A meaningful life can be extremely satisfying in the face of hardship, but a meaningless life, one without purpose, would be more of an ordeal, even without hardship. So we find something meaningful when it matters to other people. And a practical example, again, research shows that when parents have children, they'll consistently report that there is more demands, there's less opportunities for fun times in many cases than pre-children, and there's just more drudgery. However, parents will often consistently report that having children is one of the most meaningful parts of their life and contributes to their happiness. Or those who care for sick family members or friends will say, despite the challenge of having that caring role, the purpose of looking after and supporting another person provides meaning and therefore makes those difficult circumstances more bearable. So what does it mean for purpose in the workplace? Now, according to Dan Pink's book, Drive, What Motivates Us, a sense of purpose is an intrinsic motivator. It requires us to pay a lot of attention to what that purpose is and to focus on it in order to be successful. When I work with clients, they will often find it really helpful to take time to define the purpose of their job role, the purpose of their team, and what is inspiring or motivating about that purpose for them. So here are some questions you can use and that I will often use with clients to help them really focus in on their purpose. So why does my job role exist in a business or an organization? How does my job benefit others? And again, others mightn't necessarily be people that we work with. It could be clients, it could be suppliers, and indeed it could be our families. How do they benefit from the role that we have? What keeps me or us, if we're thinking about a team, moving forward when we face challenges? What's going to keep us motivated and inspired to deal with obstacles that we confront? And how do our decisions and actions fit with our purpose? So without a purpose, it can be a bit like sailing a ship with no clear direction. We're sort of just bobbing around on the surface of the ocean. And if storm at sea comes along, you can imagine what happens to a ship that has no rudder or direction. It will simply just get buffeted from side to side. So I wanted to share with you an example of working with an organization and a team around purpose. And in particular, this is the executive team of a fast-moving consumer goods company. It's the Australian subsidiary of a multinational. And they, in early 2021, had rebuilt or reformed the executive team such that they had 4 new members joining out of 7. Now, some background here for this organization, they actually had a huge spike in sales for their products and services, largely resulting from the pandemic. They also were dealing with varied expectations that their staff had about who was comfortable or willing to return to a workplace full-time and who was looking for more a hybrid model. And they also needed to find ways to find new staff, recruit and retain a larger workforce in order to meet the demand for their services and products. So this CEO, she said it was so important to get the executive leadership team lined up with a clear direction and purpose that she wanted to invest time with that team building a shared purpose. Now, how did they go about doing that? Here in Melbourne, she actually worked between lockdowns to schedule an off-site session for the executive team where I helped facilitate for them learning about how they would define what their purpose was. And the key things we spent some time on, not across the whole 3 days, but part of the 3 days, was getting them to really get a picture of who they are as individuals and as a team, how they need to and want to work together, how they build trust and hold each other accountable, and what is the purpose of their team and how does it fit with their wider organizational purpose. Now, after spending some time, and it was a very iterative method where they went backwards and forwards and many drafts, the purpose that they formed for their executive team was our team's purpose is to inspire and empower our people to realize their potential to deliver exceptional value for one another, our customers, and make it the best place to work and win. And what they used that purpose for was not simply just a poster on the wall in their meeting room, but to actually use it as a filter for aligning their decisions and actions around what they did in the business. And it particularly, they said, became helpful when they were presented with divergent views and opinions about how to manage lockdowns and keep staff engaged and supported. It also has been helping them this year when they've been presented with different views on work conditions around remote work, hybrid work, and how does their purpose guide them in what kind of decisions are going to align with what matters and what's important. The next part is understanding how change affects people differently. And this is often a part that can be easily overlooked, particularly when people are expected to change or adapt to changes in a very rapid way. Change ultimately is subjective and personal. A change for one person that seems minor could seem devastating for another person. And I've heard people say, I'm not sure why they're so upset, it's not a big deal. That often highlights the difference in how people are perceiving the same change situation. And you can see here for our 2 skydivers, the last minute information about a change is very personal and could have quite a devastating impact for them. So how do we increase our understanding of these different responses people have towards change? This is where it's important to consider personality during times of change, and when we experience stress resulting from change, how understanding personality can be a useful way of not only understanding why, but how to respond. Now, when we think about personality, it's the habitual ways in which we think, feel, and act on most occasions. And we know from years of research and experience, personality can influence how we understand and make sense of change, how people evaluate alternatives or decisions that relate to change. It also influences how we interact with other people or how we prefer to interact with other people during change. And there's also a lot of material on it highlights how different people might respond differently to stress when faced with change. So a widely used framework for understanding personality is the Myers-Briggs personality type framework. And some of you on our session today may be very familiar with this theory and framework. For others, it may not be something you have come across, or you may have only had a limited exposure to it. Now, for those who want to learn more about it, we will have some resources to share with you following our webinar today that Vicky will point out. But I wanted to give everyone some practical examples of how knowing about personality preferences can be helpful with changes that we might be experiencing, but also working with other people and how they might experience it differently. At a very summary level, the MBTI framework and assessment measures people on 4 broad personality preferences. And when we combine all those preferences together in all their possible combinations, they result in 16 broad personality types. And what we have seen and know from the research is that all personality types can adapt to change, and all personality types are likely at some point to experience stress. So it's not like any type is more immune or accepting of change. But I wanted to hone in on an example of one part of this framework, which is the pair of preferences for extroversion, introversion, just to give you some examples from research and our work of how this relates to change. From our research, particularly during the pandemic and as more remote and hybrid work started to emerge, we found that people who prefer extroversion and introversion might in fact have different experiences and different stresses as a result of that. Now, during normal times, people who prefer extroversion can feel stressed or de-energized by spending too much time alone and not having enough opportunities for external stimulation, be it from other people or activities. Whereas people who prefer introversion during normal times can report that they feel either stressed or de-energized by having to spend too much time with others and not having enough time to work or reflect independently and having too many external distractions. Now, what we've seen in the last 2 years is that on our research, the majority of extroverts started describing that the experience of particularly remote work and in some cases hybrid work was a challenge for them because they didn't have the usual number of people around them to interact with and bounce ideas off. And there was just less stimulation, which made it more difficult in some ways to focus or keep focused on work. And also, there's been less opportunity to socialize or even travel. And of course, some of that's starting to change now for ourselves this year where things open up. Whereas on the introversion side, people in that more remote or hybrid working arrangement talked about having to return to the office can be, or is partly being considered as a stress or more of a challenge. Equally, working at home, surrounded by other people, has presented its challenges around being noisy. And many introverts have reported that continual online meetings or the expectation of needing to be always in contact can be draining. And just to pinpoint some further findings from our research, particularly in the first parts of the pandemic and lockdown phase, we asked people of different personality types some of their experiences and explored whether in fact there were differences. So here again, just looking at extroverted and introverted types, you'll see that introverts tend to report or agree that working in a home environment or a remote environment offers peace and quiet more so than being in the workplace. The agreement was lower for extroverts. And introverts were also highlighting that working from home has given them space to reflect and take stock more so than the extroverts. Now, if we look at the experience of working away and missing people around them, extroverts tend to report that more of a challenge or a concern. And again, extroverts were tending to report that life was too quiet when working in that more remote or away from other people. So these differences are significant because they're going to influence how people respond to decisions about when do we bring people back to work together in the same space and when is it a good idea to maybe work separately or remotely. We've also seen in organizational change work over many years that the MBTI framework can help people understand different reactions that different personality types might have to change. And here are some common reactions different type groups report when dealing with changes at work. And the reason we're sharing this with you today is this might be helpful for both leaders and employees to better understand not only why there are differences, but what might be some useful responses. So the types that have in common introversion and sensing, when they're faced with change, one of the first things they'll want to explore is what does need to change and what can be kept. What's working and how is that preserved, and only change the things that really need to be changed. Now, if we look at the opposite type preference group, the extroverted intuitive types, these folks will often look for ways to change things, even when things might already be working effectively. And they're often wanting to challenge, can we try and do something new? Now you can see the focus for these two type groups here are almost opposite of each other. There's value in both those approaches, but that can lead to tension or misunderstanding if not understood. When we look at the personality types that have introversion and intuition in common, they will often identify good reasons for why things need to change, but they want time to reflect and think through it deeply for themselves before having to act on it. In comparison, types that have extroversion and sensing as part of their personality, they'll look at what change isn't working or what's not working and want to fix it, but they want to get in and do it quickly. These types of people usually are the do-it people. Now, again, you can see the diagonal opposite, wanting to think about it before changing and wanting to do it to make it change. Again, tension can arise there. So what's an example of how this played out for our executive team that I just was mentioning earlier? So when we used that time with the executive team together, particularly at the offsite, I took them through a process to help them learn how their personality preferences affect decisions about how they work together, but also understanding how their employees will have a range of responses to change based on the various personality types. And this enabled them to make more considered decisions about how to involve employees in change and when to work remotely, when to bring people in person, and also how to negotiate different preference needs. Again, it's not going to be easy to please everyone, but how do you come to decisions and outcomes that honor the needs of all types in some way? Now, when you look at their team profile from a personality point of view, and you can see each of the members represented with the black shoulder and heads, you can see there's actually a fair bit of diversity of their types within this team. And in fact, there are also representatives of all four of those broad group types that I was just showing you on the previous screen and their responses to change. Now, when teams are fairly diverse in personality type, it can result potentially in misunderstandings within the team or even conflict because people are unaware of why everyone's looking at it differently. However, if people understand where each other's personality preferences are and how that's shaping their views and perspectives, rather than lead to misunderstanding, it can actually be a powerful way of leveraging the diverse ways of looking at the situation and tapping into the strengths of different personality types in the team. Now, this executive team actually said having this understanding of people and different personality needs enabled them and is continuing to enable them to respond appropriately to different reactions they're seeing from employees as they start to renegotiate or develop plans around how they work together coming out of the intense period of the pandemic. And another thing that they found useful was mapping the broad or majority behaviors that this personality type team might exhibit. And based on their majority type preferences, this team agreed that they were probably more likely to be introverted and contained and reflective when they approach things and need to be more mindful of the extroverted needs. They tended to be more focused on the concepts and big pictures, but might overlook the facts. They also were acknowledging that a lot of their decisions is based around logical and objective reasoning, when potentially they might overlook the impact of how it affects relationships or values. And finally, they also identified their preference for having fairly structured and planned approach might inhibit opportunities to take on different ways or adapt to new ways of working. So overall, they found this very illuminating to help them navigate the changes that they were addressing at the time and are still addressing. So now I wanted to focus on the issue of inclusion, which again is getting a lot of coverage in media about how inclusive workplaces are and approach to leadership. But I also wanted to reinforce the importance of inclusion as a way of helping people commit to change, because it helps them have ownership of the change. So leaders, and in fact all of us, have a series of implicit associations and biases that are formed from our experiences, from the environments that we work and live in. And some of those implicit associations and biases are also based on our underlying personality preferences. We tend to like or favor certain things over other ways. Now, if we have these implicit biases, and when I say implicit, we're not always paying attention to them, it can result in favoring sameness, things that we like or feel comfortable doing, or making decisions that favor ease and just say, this is the easiest thing to do. But that's not always the best decisions or the best course of action. And we often see this can cause problems around who we recruit or hire, who we promote, and how we establish norms. And what is natural for some leaders to do is to naturally favor or encourage people who behave similar or different to themselves, or to set norms in an organization that work for their own preferences and needs. Now, if we leave these potential biases unexplored, it can ultimately lead to people feeling excluded. And this is obviously the antithesis of having an inclusive workplace. So this is where leaders need to work with diversity and also demonstrate inclusion if they're going to build commitment from employees and others to respond to and to work with changes that need to be implemented. Now, what do we mean by diversity? Diversity has many flavors and many forms, and I'm sure many of us are hearing and seeing where a number of organizations are trying to proactively encourage and nurture diversity in their organizations. But for us as practitioners of personality, when we're talking about diversity, what we're really looking at is the characteristics that differentiate people in how they use their thinking, different thinking styles. So what are some of the aspects recognized within the umbrella of diversity of thought? Here are some aspects of each of us that shapes our work behavior. First of all, our thinking styles are what are the things we pay attention to when we're presented with information and choices, and we all have natural preferences around that. Also, our experiences from life and work will shape our thinking. The values that a person has will shape their thinking, and of course their personality. And what most of us are left with trying to work out what a person's thinking is their work style. And our image here of the elements that sit above the waterline versus the elements that sit below the waterline, like the hidden iceberg, diversity of thought tends to be in the harder to see category. Often we only see people's work behavior and make assumptions about their personality, values, and thinking styles. So helping people be more open and identifying where these thinking style differences is one way of building diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So as a consulting business, we've discovered that no matter how diverse a team or leadership bench is, or how inclusive teams are, leaders still have the greatest responsibility and influence on whether people experience their workplace as inclusive or not. And through a particular set of behaviors that that leaders demonstrate, we've identified that there are 8 key competencies and found ways to help leaders develop these inclusive leadership competencies. And here they are on screen, and we've actually built a leadership program that helps leaders not only become aware of these competencies, but where do they sit on it. Now, these inclusive leadership behaviours don't happen automatically. They come with some conscious thought and effort. And one of the starting points is to help leaders identify which of these competencies they naturally demonstrate and are helping them, but which of these competencies they may overlook. So the starting point is to build awareness and then move to comfort and competence exhibiting these behaviours. And I'll show you how that was used with our exec team shortly. We also have other ways of understanding what people might expect or need and what might lead to inclusive behaviour or exclusive behaviour. And this is where we've introduced our executive team to another model of personality that focuses in on interpersonal needs. This model is based on an assessment called the FIRO assessment. And what it really helps people identify is to what extent and at what point are each of these 3 interpersonal needs satisfied for an individual person. Now, I'll keep this very brief because we do have more information about the FIRO as part of our resources and website. But this particular assessment and theory highlights that all human beings, to some extent, need or want to be involved, to some extent, need and want to have some influence, and to some extent, need and want to have a degree of connection or intimacy with who they're working with. And what is different between people is there's different levels at which people's needs are met on these 3 areas. And this can sometimes contribute to people feeling excluded when their interpersonal needs are not being acknowledged or met by their co-workers. It also means that sometimes we're left guessing what people might want unless there's a common understanding of these needs. And if I took the example of the need for involvement, if this need is not met in the workplace for a person, some behaviours you might start to see is they start to talk excessively in a team or in a team meeting. Or alternatively, if someone's not feeling involved, they may actually withdraw from a discussion and stop contributing so that they don't set themselves up for failure. Now, all we are often left looking at or seeing is whether a person's talking too much or not talking at all, and we're left guessing, but why is that happening? So what we found is the FIRO helps bring and surface an awareness of what's working and what's not working for each member of a team or for a leader and their followers. So our exec team actually experienced the FIRO and explored the inclusive leadership competencies that I was just mentioning before. And then they took some very practical and proactive steps to build an inclusive approach to leading, because they identified it was going to be important as they work together in 2022 and beyond. And some ways they did that is the CEO and executive team scheduled individual pair and share sessions with each other, usually in a very informal way, over a coffee or something, a meal. And what they actually shared with each other is based on their learning of their personality and their interpersonal needs, where there might be some biases and how to help each other manage that. The team also shared and compared feedback about the effectiveness of their inclusive leadership behaviour, where they were hitting the mark and where they were missing it. And to get a further calibration of that, the executive team sought feedback from their employees about how inclusive their approach to leadership was, both through formal surveys and informal staff forums. They have found it such a useful way of navigating and heading off misunderstandings that they have continued ongoing evaluations with each other and with their staff to check that they're on track for building an inclusive workplace. The final piece here, which emerged in the earlier part of the research I was sharing in our session, is that the pandemic has resulted in not only people paying more attention to their well-being, but being more mindful of how it relates to their workplace and their work experiences. Now, my colleagues and I have been researching well-being since 2016, in particular workplace wellbeing. And we've done that by developing a wellbeing measure, which has now been validated and pressure tested many times over recent years. And indeed, I actually presented in a webinar in recent months our latest wellbeing research. So if anyone does want to dig deeper into this wellbeing research and our model and what we found, that a recording of that webinar is on our website. And we'll also be sharing with those of you who have joined our session today a wellbeing resource that's come out of that research. But what I wanted to highlight from the research that we found so far is its relationship to inclusive leadership and how that might be playing out at work. So here's what we found from our latest round of research. And when participants were asked to rate their current level of well-being at work, and also asked to evaluate how included or supported they felt by their supervisor or their leader, what we found is there was very clear relationships between well-being and inclusive leadership. So people who felt included and supported by their leader or supervisor reported higher levels of well-being than those who didn't feel supported. Now, this may not be a surprise for most of us. It kind of makes sense. If I feel supported and included, I'm likely to feel more positive at work. But what we actually were able to specifically identify is what are the behaviors leaders, inclusive leaders, demonstrate to their employees that support their employees' well-being. And you can see some of the strongest relationships there. Employees who were understood by their leader, it boosted their well-being. Mistakes and opportunities for learning, or when their leaders viewed mistakes as opportunities for learning and growth, employees tended to say that supported their well-being. Or when leaders focused on what the employee is doing right and not just what they were doing wrong, that was a sign or a helpful behavior. Where leaders sought the perspectives of their teams or their employees, including the individual, that was a way of supporting their well-being. And in general, employees who rated their leaders as inclusive, that correlated with their well-being. So this is information that hopefully gives you an idea about where well-being and inclusion become connected. And for those who'd like to look at what are some practical ways or what are some evidence-based ways of building well-being from our research, we've captured the different strategies, actions, workplace actions that support people's well-being. In particular, we found there was no one size fits all. There's no one activity that works for everyone. However, there were specific activities that worked better for some personality types than others. So that's some research that we'll be happy to share with you and will be available at the end of our session today. For those who'd like to dig in further into our wellbeing resources, again, we have our research-informed ways of increasing employee wellbeing so that it's not just feel good, but the ones that are being reported to work. And we have more summaries of our research. And for those in leadership roles who are thinking, well, how do I start a wellbeing conversation with the people I work with? We've got some tips and guidelines there. So the final things I wanted to point to is probably some tips for leaders in particular, as they are those of you who are leading more in an environment where there's a hybrid workplace. Starting with the leader themselves, think about what the purpose of your role is and why it matters to you and others. What parts of your personality are helping you adapt to the changes that you're needing to lead? And how are you going about evaluating how inclusive you are as a leader? When you're looking at people that you're leading, it's important to discuss and agree how you're going to work together, particularly if there's difference or a mismatch in expectations, and finding out how others are experiencing the change, not just guessing or assuming how they're responding to the change. And it will be also important, particularly in this hybrid working world, to identify how we include people and honour their preferences in various forms, whether working in person or remotely, and how that supports their ownership of change. So to summarize what we've looked at in our session today, I'm hoping that you've got some clarity about what are some of the evidence-based expectations that have emerged and changes in the workplace, the importance of having a clear purpose, not only for ourselves, but the teams and organizations we work with, how understanding personality, our own personality and the personality of those we work closest with can support constructive responses to change, and the importance of inclusive leadership, not just for building ownership of change, but also supporting well-being of the people that we work with. So I'd like to thank everyone for spending some time looking at what we've identified from research and our experience. And I'm going to turn back over to Vicky now before we take some of your questions or look at potentially some change challenges.
Thanks, Martin. That was a really great session. So before we open the chat to any questions, I just want to let you know about a few of our up and coming events and other services and products that you might find interesting. So if you have a need for some expert advice or an extra set of hands, we offer consulting services where one of our experienced consultants like Martin can get to know your organization and design and deliver a customized solution to meet your business needs. We specialize in the areas of leadership, team, and organizational development, as well as talent assessments for selection and succession planning. This year, we've actually seen a real call for both virtual and in-person sessions with a focus on inclusive leadership as well as leading change, specifically for leadership groups. And in terms of team development, we're delivering workshops that relate to connection, change, and accelerating team performance in the hybrid environment. For those interested in bringing capabilities in-house to work with the MBTI personality framework, we've got both virtual and in-person certification programs scheduled for the remainder of the year. We've also got a range of other programs, including VIRO assessments, which Martin mentioned just briefly earlier, as well as emotional intelligence, 360-degree feedback, and career counselling. If you are already certified, which some of you may be interested in designing a change-based workshop yourself. So we've actually got a foundation facilitator kit with notes, booklets. There's also access to an app and in-depth personalized reports that can help you. And you can access that either via our website or feel free to get in touch and place an order. Finally, before we hit some questions, if you intend to be in Sydney during the 15th to the 17th of August, we'll be exhibiting at the RE conference. At the stand, you'll be able to meet Martin along with some other facilitators and account managers if you've got any questions or anything that you'd like to run through. And we'll also be running a webinar in August on the topic of interpersonal needs and performance. We will include a link to that webinar in our post-session follow-up email, which will also have notes and a recording of this session. So I think we've quickly got time for a couple of questions. So I've picked out a few that you submitted earlier on, and one is around how is purpose of a team different to a company's purpose statement?
Okay, that's a good thing to keep in mind. So most organizations will have a stated mission, purpose. It's often represented on a wall in the reception area or around the office or workplace. That is important because that gives the direction and purpose for everyone who's part of that organization. When we work with a team that's part of that organization, in example, our executive team today, it was also helping them identify at the team level what is their purpose and how does it fit with the company's purpose. So it's not like one is more important than the other, but what a lot of people have trouble connecting with is the overarching company purpose. If it's left that broad, it can be harder to relate it back to what we do together as a team in our organization or what I do in my role. And so I've often asked, and I did in the case of our case study today, get the executive team to reflect back and see where does their team purpose align with the company purpose.
Great, thanks for that. Maybe we can squeeze in one more.
Mhm.
Is the wellbeing research that you mentioned continuing this year, and are there any insights or findings that you can share with us already?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to highlight. Yes, we are. In fact, we're right in the middle of collecting responses and data. So if you have seen our invite to participate, it takes 5 minutes to complete that survey. And in particular this year, we're focusing in on psychological safety and how that might relate to well-being. And although we don't have all the data in yet, we're actually starting to see some initial results coming through that the more people feel psychologically safe at work, the more likely their well-being is going to be at the positive end. But we'll look forward to sharing the final results once we've got all that data in the coming months.
Amazing. Thank you for those questions and for those answers, Martin. We're now out of time, unfortunately, but if we didn't get to your question, we will be sure to follow up with you individually. So thank you very much for submitting them. And we will also be following up to all attendees and all those who registered with a copy of the recording of this session, along with notes from today's webinar in the next few business days, along with some free resources, as Martin mentioned earlier. So thank you very much for joining us. And thank you again, Martin, for your presentation.
Great, thanks Vicky, and thanks everyone for joining.